Good morning, everybody, and first of all, I'd like to thank Denise for having invited me. It's a great pleasure and an honour to have been asked. I have to say, I have found Violetta's presentation wonderful in terms of setting the scene, and I've learned a lot from it, and it just shows you cannot beat actually having been at the coalface as she has been. So I have found it very, very helpful setting the scene also for what I want to bring to you. And just a couple of background items, if I may. I have chosen to speak about 3 areas, and the reason I chose to speak about 3 areas is that the International Law Association, the Committee on Feminism and International Law, it's involved in a research project, and our latest report this year dealt with some comparative experiences in a number of states which have ratified the CEDAW and who have people on our committee. And coincidentally, 3 of the areas we dealt with are quite topical in Ireland at the moment, not just because of the CEDAW reporting cycle, but also because there have been some developments, or are going to be some developments, and fingers are crossed that there will be some developments. So that is why I have chosen these 3 areas. And for those of you who might have some interest in a broader treatment of the areas and the relevant footnotes where you can follow up, I will ask Denise to include the website of the ILA, where you can then get the committee's reports. And you will also have here my email. If anybody has a question, please feel free to contact me. And the second sort of background comment I'd like to make is I am the secretary of the Irish branch of the International Law Association, and everybody is welcome to join. You don't have to be a lawyer, you really have to be interested in international law. So if you have any interest, again, look at the website and you have my email. That's the commercial. Okay. So I have brought along some slides, not because I want to read them out to you, but merely because it allows me to have a structure and also to give you some wording that you can then consult later. This is the structure of what I plan to deal with, and I will do my best to follow those, because I can very easily deviate. So that's really just for me, but it will also give you wording that you can refer back to and comparisons. So ratification, you might be interested to know, although the treaty stems from 1979, we ratified it in 85, and then we ratified the optional protocol in 2000. Periodic reports. As you can see, we have submitted 7 periodic reports up to and including 2016, and you have the sort of timelines there. We have tended to be late. I think if one were to delve into the records, you would see the reason we have been late is work overload in the relevant departments. And I offer you that because that's what I've read, and all I can say is we all recognise that people can be overloaded, no question, all of us have been, but it also says a little something perhaps about the listing of priority tasks. But I wouldn't like to criticise any civil servant who is trying to do his or her level best. So we are bang up to date, which is why I thought it was quite useful to tackle or address you with my 3 topics, which by coincidence we had dealt with in our international report. So Violetta has given us a super overview of the treaty itself, but I'd also like to draw your attention to the fact that not just relevant treaty articles are of importance, but also the so-called general recommendations, because they can flesh out what is in the treaty itself. And also I draw your attention to, and I use a broad term, the Beijing documentation, and that brings us right up to the 2030 agenda. So I'm going to just give you a little tiny example of stereotyping, which is my first topic. And I really like this quotation because I think it says so much. I came across it in a report on the civil service just after the foundation of the state. It had been examined, and this was published in 1936. And when I read this, my eyes popped out. Would anybody think that these are tasks peculiar? Isn't it a wonderful word? Peculiar. I've had to translate that for other people. To women. So what I'm saying is that before the 1937 Constitution came about, we actually had certain thought processes. I'll leave that with you. I had lots and lots of other examples, but and you will find some of them in the ILA report footnoted. And at this stage, could I recommend 2 books to you to read that I found very useful? There was Nuala Fennell. Some of you may remember Nuala Fennell. And she had her autobiography, and I must say I enjoyed it in terms of the path she had to take. And another one that perhaps is not so familiar to you is the biography of Thecla Beer. And many of you may be familiar with the name Thecla Beer. She was definitely an impressive woman. She chaired the first Commission on the Status of Women. And again, you will find somebody who, while she was successful, she was the first female Secretary General of a department. She really was a feminist and was not afraid to say so. So those are 2 books that, you could read them on the beach if you found time. So stereotyping has been much criticised, and it has in fact been going on since the very early days of the CEDAW reports. And what has been criticised and continues to be criticised, because it's one of the questions from the CEDAW Committee to Ireland, is what's going to happen about this article of the Constitution. And I was interested in what Violetta said about stereotyping, because, and I have given you a quote from the 1972 Commission on the Status of Women about how destructive stereotyping can be, how it says you can get rid of discrimination, but the stereotyping in fact has longer tentacles. And if you look at the Irish report, which we will look at in a moment, you will see how the government is responding to the question on stereotyping. And they have dealt with it in an extensive way, but they focused on education, which is important when you look at where women are represented in the educational levels. But we're now presented with a challenge, because as we all know, this is an article of the Constitution, and how do we change the Constitution? And Violetta drew our attention to the fact that the state is obliged to meet its obligations. So how does the state meet its obligations if it is up to us, the electorate, to go out and change it? And don't forget that some people will really cling to this article of the Constitution because they subscribe to the sentiments which it conveys, and it would be so easy to use these sentiments in a negative way. So it's not going to be easy. As most of you will know, there has been a constitutional convention which discussed this and reported in 2013 and recommended that it go to a referendum. And the then Minister for Justice, Alan Shatter, explained that he was very supportive of the change, but the proposal, the proposed wording, just he felt wouldn't work, to take out women and to insert carer. So it is going to be a challenge, but this continues to be criticised as stereotyping women and having the impact as referred to in the 1972 Commission on the Status of Women, that you just have this image, this is what women do. And if you link it back to work peculiar to women, you can see how in fact a picture can be built. So all of you will have your say, and that is on the coming up ahead of us. And I've also given you the quotation in the 1972 Commission on the Status of Women, where it talks about getting rid of discrimination, but you're still left with this, the impact of stereotyping. So that is another piece of written work I could recommend. If you haven't read it, you might like to. It can be difficult to find, but I've given you in the report, you will find a web link to it. And this is what the CEDAW committee says about stereotyping. And you notice there it says, and it fits in with what Violetta said about obligations of states. States parties shall take all appropriate measures. So that leaves it up to the member states or the state party to decide what the appropriate measure is. Remember, in our case, to change the constitution, it is up to us to say yes or no. So consider the difficulty the government will have and the Attorney General in finding a wording. The Constitutional Convention has reported on it. The then Minister for Justice has explained the difficulty. So how are we going to square that difficulty with states parties shall take all appropriate measures? Article 5 is actually very important in general, not just for stereotyping, through the wording of state parties shall take all appropriate measures. So it could be seen almost as a thread running through the convention itself. These were the questions then from the CEDAW committee, the treaty body, and that's what the Irish government had to respond to. So I'm putting it there so that you have a continuation of what the treaty says, the question and the answer. And the Irish report is interesting in relation to stereotyping. It actually deals with it from an educational point of view and the defence forces. Now I have to sit back and think, but what about the Constitution? And indeed, what about education? You find those in other parts of the Irish report. Okay, so I just draw that to your attention, and it does refer there to the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. And I must say, anything I've seen from that body has been very impressive in general. And I've given you the paragraphs where you'll find the other Irish report. In terms of Article 41.1 of the Constitution, I sort of summarised what the Irish report said, that it was in the programme for partnership government, referring back to the Constitutional Convention, which was published in May 2016. Now remember, our election was in February, and we had eventually a partnership government, and this is where we find a commitment to have a referendum. But I repeat again, it's up to the electorate to decide, and then states parties shall take all appropriate. What will the government then do? The referendum is to be held, we were told, and the government also said in its report that the Constitutional Convention had discussed it, as I said, and also mentioned that it had been discussed in the Dáil. Public and political life was the second area we chose in our committee to deal with, but that's linked to stereotyping, and I chose to draw to your attention because it also comes under a broader term which we find in the Beijing documents, women in power and decision making. And what we try to emphasise in our report, drawing on some research done by Mary Robinson's Foundation, that power and decision making has to be actually meaningful, because what we found is that it's not unusual for women sort of to be put forward as token persons, but actually what role have they got? And sometimes one should look at members of a government and ask yourself, what actual portfolios do they have? So I think it's not just numbers. And I just invite you, because it's dealt with in our report, to look at where our 4 female ministers are, who holds the purse strings. It's not one. And that's really meaningful. That's not to say that there aren't other areas that are really important and can impact on life, but at the end of the day, you know the song, money makes the world go round. So Article 7 and Article 8 are the relevant treaty articles in terms of participation in political life, and then you've got general recommendations, particularly 23 and 24, and the Beijing documents. I just draw all of that to your attention. And in its report, Ireland, and I've given you the relevant paragraphs, and I've drawn out just some highlights. It addresses women in the Dáil, 22.2%, which is the highest ever since, to use that awful phrase, the foundation of the state, right? 22.2. But the Beijing documents tell us that to get any change, you need a critical mass of 30%. And I can tell you that of the 193 countries which are whose stats are published by the Interparliamentary Union, only 25% of those 193, in fact, hit that 30% critical mass. So Ireland is below that, but that is the highest we have ever had. And I will come back to the highest that we've ever had in a moment. We have 26% are members of the government. I have to say, by my calculations, I had worked out 27%. But if the Irish report says 26, so I will run with that. And then I just have to bring your attention to the ministers of state. To 18 ministers of state. Now remember, members of the parliament are constrained numerically by the constitution. 15, according to the constitution. There is no restraint numerically, constitutionally, on ministers of state. What would you have expected? Would it be unreasonable to say 50-50? I respectfully suggest that balance was not a factor there. It was geographical distribution and also bringing together a government, remember, partnership government. But I just thought that that was a missed opportunity, because the Irish Times had reported that the Taoiseach had promised a 50-50 cabinet. Right? We have exactly the same percentage women in cabinet this time as we had last time, even though we have the highest number of women elected. I calculated 6% difference. There's a difference between my calculation and the government report, but shall we say we'll agree that there are more women, but still the same percentage. Missed opportunity. And then I just draw out, just to give you a flavour, the other areas that they deal with. There's no question, but there have been changes. There have been efforts. There's training. There's encouragement, etc., etc. So there have been changes, and people are moving up the food chain, but not fully. One very fascinating area I find as a lawyer is that in the legal hierarchy, all the leaders are women. Statistically, it's impossible, but it's. I feel like Gareth Fitzgerald used to talk about something that would work in practice, but not theoretically. But all the leading lawyers, are women, plus some others which you'll find listed in the report. Interestingly, the courts actually showing, with the exception of the High Court and the Court of Appeal, women are very well represented there. And when you consider how poor it used to be. And I can't give you a reason for it. I can give you a reason for the higher number of women elected, and that would be two things. Thanks to people like you, civil society going out and helping, right? No question. But also, again, we come back to money, the 2012 Political Funding Act, which tied quota candidates, being absolutely democratic, to funding. That brought them out. But one statistic I omitted here because I was rushing. There were 16 constituencies which returned no women. There was one constituency which had no woman standing. Now, I hope I'm not, I went through all of the paperwork. I find that fascinating, and I haven't heard anybody talking about it. How did it happen? Is it that women were, shall we say, they were sort of what they call in the country the hind-tit person, right? Just a sweeper. I mean, I won't tell you what my constituency is, but I found the choice for one party of a particular woman strange. So, how come we have 16 constituencies with no women elected? Is that in fact, to be devil's advocate, well actually, people don't vote for women, because that used to be the argument. So, I have a few of those figures. And then state boards, I was an elected member of a state board on three consecutive elections. I took over the by-election, I was elected again, and all the rumblings, only you can't have women, having a women's seat. And on my last outing, I got a quote and a half, so I thought, that's killed that, undemocratic approach, having women only. And there was a lot of discussion that it was really undemocratic to lay down a quota, because that prevented people, voting for the person they really wanted, which might be a man. And I did see where women who might have been in different constituencies of my state board, they might have been lower down in the actual voting percentage, but they actually jumped over men who had got higher votes further up. So I'd offer you just as practical experience. But we haven't reached the state target, which has been there since the 1990s, of 40%. We're creeping up into the high 30s, but some state boards just go undone. So my broad assessment of the whole thing is there have been improvements, including in the areas I've touched on, but there's an awful lot more to do. I've drawn your attention to the developments in the judiciary and the legal offices. State boards improved, but it remains poor. I've told you that the Beijing documentation speaks about 40%, 30% being the critical mass, and it is really distressing to think that we haven't reached that, even with the political funding. Remember, 16 constituencies have no women elected, one constituency, despite the loss of money. And I won't tell you which constituencies these are. You will find it if you want to know in my footnotes. Because I don't want to blacken any constituency's name. So therefore, if you find that as publicly available knowledge, then my hands are clean. But it does say something. I mean, we just have to think about it. If you're given the opportunity and you don't vote for women, that's why I wanted to draw to your attention. You do know that there was a challenge, a court challenge against this, and this man lost on the basis that he didn't actually have standing, that Fianna Fáil agreed to having this political funding legislation. But it's interesting that he did challenge it, because it hadn't been really popular, as you can imagine, in among those who had been a long time serving in the Dáil, and indeed many existing women deputies, when it was first mooted, didn't really approve of it. So it's not a settled thing. It has made a difference, but hasn't made enough of a difference. And then we've ended up with 50-50 cabinet by the Taoiseach, and I thought that I had put in a photograph there of the ministers of state. Have I missed it? Yeah. I thought, you know what they say about a picture saying 1,000 words, right? Or better than 1,000 words. These are the ministers of state. Fine body of men, you will agree. And to boost the females, that's nasty of me, but to add in an extra woman, we have the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach. We have the 4 ministers of state. Did nobody even look at that picture before they had it published? I mean, I took that from the newspaper. How could they? I was waiting for somebody to write to the paper. Perhaps I should have done it myself. So that, I hope, is of some interest to you, and anybody who wants to actually read the report from which I drew the research, Denise will include the website, and if not, you have my email address. Thank you very much.